turn our attention here to the law, specifically here in Canada.
Yeah, which is mainly what sort of propels the movement, the sex worker rights movement in general, and that's sex work is not actually illegal in Canada, but everything that you've got to do to work safely is communicating for the purposes of selling sex is illegal. It's illegal, pardon me, and living off your earnings is illegal. Everything you've got to do to sort of make sure you can work in safety is illegal. Even carrying condoms on the street can be used against you as evidence that you're a sex worker, even though legally that's not supposed to happen. It does happen. So the laws are set up to sort of deter people from sex working, but selling sex for money is actually not illegal in this country. They're quite ambiguous, the laws, in that sense, because you can sell sex for money, but you can't communicate to do it. You can't ask your neighbor to just look out for you to make sure nobody comes by, because that's illegal. You can't pay somebody $20 on the street to look out for you just to make sure that nobody causes any trouble, because that's illegal as well. So you're constantly running from the law because you're criminalized, but so that means you can't access the law, and that puts sex workers in a lot of danger, and it ensures that you cannot work legally in this country, really, as a sex worker. And so, we're seeking to abolish those laws and to repeal all of the laws that have to do with prostitution under the criminal code. And so what we're looking for is complete decriminalization of sex work, really.
I find it absolutely astonishing that the actual act of exchanging sex for money is not illegal.
Well, there's no victim in all of that, and I think that people, and that's why we say prostitution is a victimless crime, because it's between 2 or 3, even or 4 consenting adults, really. Right. And there shouldn't be any discrimination against that. And it's funny because there's the people who do enforce the laws for prostitution, are called the morality squad, which I think is quite funny, and I always get a chuckle at that. Mm-hmm. But it for me, it highlights the fact that the laws are governed by a moral sense of justice and not by a reality necessarily.
By making everything surrounding sex work, by the promotion of it and whatnot, by making all of that illegal, I don't understand why they wouldn't simply make the exchange for sex for money illegal.
Well, changing the criminal code is quite a lengthy process. And when the laws came about, they were sort of protectionist in the sense that they were meant to protect people. They were meant to protect minors. They were meant to protect people from in gambling situations. Where there was a lot of prostitution, and so who it was meant to protect is really uncertain at this point, because there are laws that say you can't coerce people into There's the procuring law that you can't tell people where to work or how to work, and that's sort of known as the pimping law. But really what that is it doesn't protect you against coercion. There are laws that do protect you against coercion that have nothing to do with prostitution laws, but it does prevent it prevents me from telling somebody where they could work that's safe for them, or giving them advice on how to work or how to have a business plan for work. So those things that you need, which I would consider occupational health and safety standards, or standards for, like, guidelines for work practice, are actually illegal to do. Changing the law to make sex work illegal would be to make the act of sex for money illegal would be taking about 1,500 steps backwards, I think. So what we're looking to do is make it all not legal, but just we're trying to legitimize the trade.
You had mentioned earlier in this particular conversation that, someone carrying condoms could be used against them.
Mm-hmm. This is why it's problematic, the laws, because they're problematic for your physical safety and for your mental safety, but also, your physical safety in the sense of HIV prevention, because if you're caught with too many condoms on you, if you're crossing the border with too many condoms on you, you're questioned. If you're on the street with too many condoms on you, you're questioned. When really that's ridiculous. But the cops will take advantage of that if they want. They can't actually use that as evidence, but they can use that to interrogate you and to instill you with fear into admitting that you were communicating for the purposes of selling sex.
Let's go a little bit deeper here. You had mentioned the word decriminalization. Mm-hmm. And is there a difference between decriminalization and it being legal?
There's a massive difference. Legalization is when, I mean, we see legalization as a way for the state to have more control over sex work activity, for them to decide how and when it's going to take place. I like to liken those particular words just to the argument of decriminalizing pot. I mean, it's a very different sort of domain, but in terms of the legal jargon, we can make similarities here. And that's, people don't want pot to be legalized because they don't want it to be governed by the state, so the state can determine how much you can have and where you can get it, etc. But rather, they want it to be legitimized the same way that cigarettes are, where they can buy it and sell it, etc. And decriminalization would mean that sex workers would not be criminalized. We would take all the codes out of the criminal code that pertain to prostitution. And it would involve some kind of regulation the way any other commercial industry does, but it would not be governed by the state per se. You could have an association of sex workers the same way there's an association of psychologists. That would govern the way that their work would function. So there's a massive difference. I mean, and what you find in a lot of legalized situations, like the Nevada brothels, for example, is that there's mandatory testing of prostitutes, which is completely unsafe because it makes sure that the clients, it ensures that the sex workers are tested, but the clients are not, and you're only as safe as your next client. It also sort of promotes this notion of sex workers as vehicles for HIV, and it doesn't really address the issue of sex education and the fact that, you know, safe sex needs to be practiced by everybody, not just by sex workers who really are practicing more safe sex than anybody else. So there's a big difference. There's a huge difference between legalization. That's why the sex worker rights movement in particular is fighting for decriminalization of the sex trade in all countries around the world.